Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are pleased to be here with you this afternoon to discuss a pertinent topic to the world we live in today, security issues in the Indo-Pacific. My name is John Schaus. I lead the Indo-Pacific security team at CNA, the Navy's federally funded research and development center. With me are four illustrious guests. I will not go through their bios in detail, as you probably know them, which is why you're here. But briefly, to my left, Lieutenant General Steve Sklenka, United States Marine Corps, Deputy Commandant for Installation and Logistics. Vice Admiral Blake Converse, Deputy Commander of U.S. Pacific Fleet. Vice Admiral Andy Johnson, Commander Pacific Area for the United States Coast Guard. And Mr. Joe Ferrara, C6ISR for Lockheed Martin. The Indo-Pacific is buzzing with activity, thankfully not in the same way as other regions, but briefly, I think it's worth noting as we start that Secretary Rubio and Secretary Hegseth have both made extensive comments about the importance of this region. Secretary Hegseth returned from stops in Guam, the Philippines, and Japan earlier this month, and he there announced support for both the U.S.-Japan and the U.S.-Philippine alliances, including deepening partnerships with both countries. At the same time, we know that China is a major competitor and a challenge to the United States on a number of fronts. Finding a way to navigate the alliances, the competition, and the potential for conflict with China is going to captivate many of our imaginations and motivate much of our work for the next decade at least. So over the next hour, I want to start digging into these issues and leveraging the experience and perspectives of the gentlemen here with me on stage. So with that, let me start with two other quick housekeeping notes. We'll be taking questions via iPad. So you'll see QR codes on your table and on the screens to either side of the stage. If you'd like to submit a question, please submit it that way. It'll appear on this iPad, and I will try and bundle similar questions together. And this session is on the record. And so we just want to make sure everybody is clear on that as we get started. No surprise. All right, General Sklenka, let's kick it off with you. In your previous position, you were the Deputy Commander at U.S. Indo-PACOM. You were there for 3 years, and you're now the Deputy Commandant for Installations and Logistics. Can you give us, to start the panel, your global view on the priorities and how those priorities translate into specifics within the Indo-Pacific? And finally, what do you bring from your previous position at Indo-PACOM to your current position?
Hey, thanks, John. It's good to see you again, too, by the way.
Likewise.
And Joe, it's good to meet you, but I'm really, really glad to be sharing the stage with a couple running buddies from the Indo-PACOM days. It's good to see you guys, Andy and Blake. Well, first of all, they're not my priorities. They're the nation's priorities and our Corps' priorities. It's pretty simple when you look at the threats that we have out there. Violent extremist organizations. Iran still has a threat in their own way. Russia still a threat, and North Korea still insists on launching missiles against all kinds of UN Security Council resolutions. But there's no doubt that the number one threat, at least in my view, is the People's Republic of China. They are the only nation out there with both the capacity and the will to challenge the United States. I don't refer to them as a near peer. They are absolutely a peer, at least in most of the categories that count. So that's something I think we need to be wary of. The reason we need to be wary of this is because it presents an entirely different fight. There's a term out there that's used pretty regularly called, I think people use the term contested logistics. I refrain from using that term. I think it's redundant. It's like CAC card or ATM machine. You know, I don't need people to tell me the water's wet. I know that when we're operating, we're going to be operating in contested space. And so whether we're doing maneuver, fires, command and control, logistics, it's in contested space. The difference is, in this day and age, none of us wearing a uniform today have ever experienced a time when you've had to operate where you were challenged in the strategic domains and in the operational domains. We've always had unfettered access in the global commons. That's not going to be the case in the Indo-Pacific, and that's a significant piece. So that's what really drives a lot of the priorities that we're having, not just in the Marine Corps, but I think within the Joint Force. You ask what the priority what I brought with me from Indo-PACOM into this new assignment. The most significant lesson I brought with me is that Goldwater-Nichols made it pretty easy for me to understand it. The number one mission of the services is to optimize the warfighting effectiveness and capabilities of the combatant commanders. So what we are doing has to, at least in the Marine Corps, has to be about providing the most capable Marine forces to the combatant commanders, and that provides both a deterrent and to hopefully prevent conflict. We know that deterrence is ultimately a psychological action that requires the second party to be deterred, and if in the event of deterrence failure, we got to prevail, because the American people aren't paying us to fight; they're paying us to win.
Great, thank you, General Sklenka. Admiral Converse, to you next. You are based at Pearl Harbor, no surprise there, and at Pacific Fleet has a responsibility for everything from the Indian Ocean to the U.S. West Coast. When I speak with allies and partners across that region, India, Vietnam, Australia, the Philippines, Korea, and Japan, I hear two consistent messages: concern over PRC aggression and commitment to enhance their own defense capabilities. From your vantage point, what developments, what relationships, what investments, what requirements with PAC Fleet and U.S. allies are underway that Washington hasn't focused on enough?
Okay. Hey, thank you very much. First, I'm sure there's a number of friends and former shipmates out here. I can't see you all because of the lights are in my eyes, but welcome and thank you for coming to this session. I'll answer that question the way I think many of us in uniform have been trained throughout our careers, and that is to check your enemy, and then check your environment, and then check yourself to ensure that you're ready for operations and combat. And when I look towards checking our adversary, and I look across the Indo-Pacific, when I was a young officer driving submarines across the Pacific almost 30 years ago, you could drive across the Pacific through the South China Sea, through the Andaman Sea, and into the Indian Ocean, and it was very unlikely that you would see a Chinese warship, a Chinese aircraft, or Chinese submarine during the entire transit. Today, on any given day, on our common operating picture, there will be over 100 Chinese warships, submarines, and auxiliaries operating in the Indo-Pacific waters. And as we see the nature of those operations, we're seeing a proliferation also of Coast Guard and People's Armed Forces merchant militia, and we're seeing more aggressive behavior by those forces. We're seeing, despite the challenges that Russia has had in Ukraine and expansion into the Pacific, and we're seeing a continually militaristic North Korea. And I would echo what General Sklenka said. It's not just a contested environment. It is the most contested environment we will operate in this decade and possibly several decades. And so those challenges are in front of us every single day when we operate in a maritime environment. I would also say that the nature of the weapons engagement zone that China provides to us as we look across the Pacific is incredibly challenging. And it's not just about long-range missiles. It's about long-range aircraft with missiles. It's about warships that can launch incredibly long-range cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. And it's about having the capability that China possesses in space, in GEO, in MEO, in LEO, with airborne sensors and terrestrial sensors to provide targeting to those weapon systems across that area. That's the nature of the adversary we're facing. What does the environment look like? I don't need to tell you how important that area is geopolitically or certainly economically, but what I can tell you is that the allies and the partners we have in those regions and the alliances that we've fostered over time couldn't be stronger. I will tell you that the nature of the operations that we do every single day with South Korea are strong and building in realism and complexity. I think you can read in a newspaper, and I will reflect to you, that our relationship and our alliance with Japan and Australia are growing every single day. Their commitment to shared deterrence is stronger than ever. Their commitment to building a military that can operate side by side with us and investing jointly in weapon systems, in platforms and sensors that interoperate is deeper than ever. And certainly, as you've seen and as we've witnessed, the interest and enthusiasm in the Philippines in strengthening the alliance that we have with them has been remarkable, and it's been a sea change within the last 3 or 4 years. And so that is the nature of the relationships that we see, and they're growing, and they're strengthening, and we see that as a huge positive for us. And then the last thing that we do when we're getting ready to go into combat is we check ourselves. What are the things that we need to do to prepare for conflict? What are the things that we need to do to ready ourselves to be able to operate in this highly contested environment? And I will tell you from the Pacific Fleet's perspective, under Admiral Aquilino, under Admiral Paparo, and now under Admiral Kaler, we are laser focused on developing the capabilities to be able to sense, see, and counter Chinese, Russian, North Korean aggression across all domains. Even though we're a maritime force, we are focused on space capabilities. We're focused on cyber capabilities and electronic warfare capabilities, as well as information operations. And to do that, within the last 2 years, about 2 years ago, we stood up a Fleet Information Warfare Center Pacific at the Pacific Fleet headquarters, led by a 2-star admiral who's now Nav I-4, Admiral Mike Bernaza, and Mike Homan has now relieved him. We've stood up a Maritime Logistics and Sustainment Task Force to be able to operate with contested logistics across the domain and to integrate with the Joint Force in sustainment operations. And we've established a capability in conjunction with the Joint Force to be ready to stand up as a JTF at a moment's notice, including a standing joint planning group and a standing joint fires and effects center. Our goal is not to get into conflict, our goal is not to go to war, but our goal is to be ready and to be able to work closely with our allies and partners in the region to assure deterrence. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral. Admiral Tiongson, your area of responsibility is a little bit larger than what the Defense Department calls the Indo-Pacific, because yours goes all the way, I think, to the coast of Africa. And your responsibilities cover a different area: safety, law enforcement, different non-military issues on most days. So as the U.S. grapples with challenging issues like illegal fishing, counter-piracy, these kinds of issues, how do you think about a safe, secure Indo-Pacific region? What does that look like? And how is the Coast Guard contributing to that mission?
All right. Thank you, John, for the question. Thank you for moderating this panel as well. And it's really an honor for me to be up here with all the panelists. Some I've known for a while, and it's just great to be among shipmates to talk about this important issue. I think, let me start with what does a secure and safe Indo-Pacific look like? In my mind, it's one that promotes America's national security, one that promotes America's prosperity. I put a period on that with the thought that it would spread to our allies and partners, those who have our shared values and beliefs, and certainly those who have those democratic ideals that we follow, and specifically the rule of law. So that's what it would look like to me, a safe and secure Indo-Pacific, and we're not there. We're not there. I think you talked about the AOR that I'm responsible for right now, and it is vast. It's about 74 million square miles. It's got over 70 nations that are in it. I always talk about it from polar bears to penguins, from Hollywood to Bollywood, and a little bit more to the east coast of Africa. So it's pretty wide. And I'm glad you said that. So I want to talk about the Indo-Pacific in a wider lens, the Pacific, if you will. So I'm sure everybody that's out here is definitely tracking that there's a national security security issue right here on our southern border. It's a national emergency, and we're getting after that as much as we can in the United States Coast Guard. So think about the transnational criminal organizations, the foreign terrorist organizations. Think about unvetted migrants that are coming across. Think about illicit narcotics that are coming that kill Americans. And we're getting after that as best we can right now, with the goal of ours to control our maritime border and approaches, to control our ports and our waterways. And we do that from the top down. So with the Coast Guard Acting Commandant has issued action orders for us to take this on, to get after that and the scourge of fentanyl. And we're doing it. And we're doing it much better than we have in the past in terms of detecting, deterring, in many ways defeating those things. And certainly we do it with the help of our partners. And I would say the U.S. Navy is helping us right now as they've given us a ship to be off of the maritime boundary line that's right there between Mexico and San Diego as we speak.
We loaned it.
It's doing great things too. Thank you. Thank you. So all of that. Did I say give a bunch of times?
Yes, you did.
So that's just one aspect of it. But I'll tell you, there's other ways too. So how are we getting after this? Safe, secure Indo-Pacific. Think about our marine transportation system. $5 trillion of goods come through our maritime commons that are basically feeding the economic engine of our nation. We're responsible for those seaways, for those port infrastructures that go ahead and enable that to happen in terms of trade. I say port infrastructures, I put that out there as kind of a feeder. I think people in the audience probably heard about these PRC cranes. You know, we're there. We're definitely there. Those types of things. And I would say the third way that we get after it is conducting military operations, activities, and investments with our partners. So as Admiral Converse can attest to, we work very closely with Indo-PACOM, the 7th Fleet, the 3rd Fleet. If there was representatives from Southcom here, they could say the same thing. Southcom and our the 4th Fleet that we have there, and then certainly with Northcom. And now that I'm mentioning Northcom, it's probably a good time to foot stomp the polar bears part, the Arctic part. And frankly, this is what I've seen. I've been in my job for nearly 3 years right now. And in that time frame, at the very beginning, we were probably averaging one like either PRC or Russian Navy vessel that was in our exclusive economic zone, in our territory where we have sovereign rights to things. It was either one of them or a research vessel from either Russia or China, or an intel vessel from either Russia or China. Last year, that number was 16. That number was 16. Folks in the audience know that there is one of these nations that calls themselves a near-Arctic nation. And with increases like that, that's something to keep an eye on and something to watch. So certainly in our Coast Guard, a lot of times because the Navy may be in different places throughout the world doing great things for our nation, we are there to meet presence with presence and ensure that there's nothing that's going on that's out of the ordinary. But we do that, and we're doing it a lot more often than we had in the past, whether it's with a surface vessel or an aircraft. So I would offer to you those are the ways that we are contributing to that safe and secure Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ferreira, you're a leader at Lockheed, leading the C6 ISR program. For those at home, I had to look this up. C6 is Command, Control, Communications, Computers, Cyber Defense, and Combat Systems. Do I have that right, Joe?
We added the combat system, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you add ISR, you get C6 ISR. and it covers, as far as I can tell, almost everything a force needs to do to manage and operate itself anywhere it goes. So let me throw this question to you. How, from an industry's perspective, can you enhance tech and capabilities for the force across the Indo-Pacific, recognizing that the technologies today may not be the most important for the future fight?
Well, first, John, thanks for pulling this panel together, and I'm really humbled to be on stage with the leaders that we in industry show up every day to support. So again, thank you for having me here. But in terms of delivering capability, how industry can support, I'd like to boil down to kind of three primary things. Number one is we need to get better at speed to market. How do we go from our labs, our government labs, to prototyping, to exercise campaigns where we're delivering MVC or MVP capabilities with the operators, to no kidding getting the capability into the warfighter's hands at scale? How do we go do that? And we've talked about the problem. We understand what some of the challenges are here. I'm not here to talk about, obviously, the acquisition. I'm going to give you an industry perspective and really an analysis that we did that said, you know, where has it worked and how can it work? And one thing, there's some obvious things, but one thing that boiled to the top in terms of where we've been successful is you have to build the .mil PF in up front. So you need the training, the sustainment, the logistics, the cyber hardening, the certification. You need to think about these things up front because you can't put these capabilities in warfighters' hands without the training and understand that you can sustain or build it out scale. Those things need to be built in up front. The other thing too is no one industry is going to get after this problem. So that leads me to the second, I think, key thing we need to do here is there needs to be more venues where we can come together and as an industry team partnered with the warfighter to go deliver this capability. And I've been closely involved with a lot of the Indo-PACOM exercise campaign, whether it's Valiant Shield or Northern Edge or some of the allies, you know, where we have Talisman Sabre with Australia, Keen Sword with Japan. And those are phenomenal learning experiences when you're out there for 3 weeks, co-located with the operators in real-world environments. But it takes about 1.5 years to plan those things. And then you go and you build these ad hoc networks, you ship the equipment out, and then after that 3 weeks, you tear it all down and it goes away. How do we create that environment where that can endure? So we need more venues that actually pull us together in an enduring way. And I'll say that one thing that we're doing is we're opening a Wayfinder lab on Oahu where we can bring in industry partners, non-traditionals. We're connecting to facilities in Australia, back to CONUS, so we can be there with the warfighter. So when we're bringing it into the lab, you just turbocharge our ability to go. When you go to those exercises, you don't have that year-long gap between bringing the capability out. And then the third thing, and I'll touch again on the allies and partners, and you heard, you know, obviously the importance of allies and partners in this, is that where industry can help is that those industry-to-industry partnerships. You know, when Japan or the Philippines, as you know, Admiral Converse mentioned, is really getting after it, Australia, they often have some sovereign requirements as well too. So for example, in C2, they want sovereign decision-making. They care about their industrial base. So what industry can do to support those objectives are making sure that we're working with those industries to say, can we have built to print or designed to spec, or where can we do cooperative development so our engineers are working side by side? Because when you get out of balance and you don't have all the objectives equally balanced, then the program might not get off the ground, or we build something that's interoperable, or we build something that is not as capable. So, and that's just, we just can't have that in Indo-Pacific given the challenge that we're facing. So I would say those are the getting at scale and speed, making sure we have the right venues, and bringing in all the allies and partners, including their industry, are three key things where industry can help support your missions.
Great, thank you. All right, we've got a second round of questions. We'll try and get through all of these and then keep some time for audience engagement. And there's some great questions coming through, so please keep those coming as well. All right, second round. General Sklenka, I'm going to start with you again. The Marine Corps has a lot going on in the Indo-Pacific. Posture adjustments in Japan, rotational forces in Australia, ongoing relocation of the Northern Marianas. Where do these efforts land in the basket of Marine Corps priorities, and how receptive are allies and partners to these kinds of posture initiatives?
Yeah, it's our top priority. Operationally, it's our top priority because that's where the nation's top priority is as well. So it's no secret that our emphasis would be on the Indo-Pacific. How receptive are the allies and partners? They want more. And they want more for several reasons. There's no doubt, and it's no surprise to anyone, that the largest economic partner or trading partner that they've got in the region is the PRC. For every nation out there, at least in the East Asian and Southeast Asian region. However, the desire to do business with the Chinese does not, it doesn't stave off the concerns that they have with being dominated by the Chinese. And in many ways, you could say that General Secretary Xi has done wonders toward helping us achieve our strategic objectives out there, because the actions that the CCP have conducted have been so aggressive and so assertive that the nations out there they really want the United States to be there with them, show that we have skin in the game with them, and serve as a security guarantor for them. But there's more to it than that. You know, when we have credible combat forces postured out there, it serves not only as an effective deterrent against aggressive CCP action, but they also serve as a critical assurance to our allies and partners out there. And I think it's important to remember a couple things with our allies and partners. One, you know, in the last few years, that term allies and partners has really taken on its own meaning, to the term where it's almost become this homogenous, ubiquitous term, where it's just one. And I'll tell you, one, there's a significant difference between an ally and a partner. And two, there are as many differences among allies as there are allies themselves. Each one has their own specific national security objectives, their own national security priorities, their own interests out there that may or may not necessarily align with ours. Their ideals and values align with ours, and that's why they're an ally. But they won't necessarily, especially the ones that are aligned even as closely with us democratically. It's important to keep that in mind, I think, because it's in issues of sovereignty, we have to have an understanding and acknowledgement of those individual nations and their sovereignty in the expectations of what they're willing to do alongside of us. In other words, what I'll tell you is this. We have great allies out there, but we should not develop plans necessarily that whose success hinges on the participation of an ally or a partner. That's not a slight to an ally or partner. That's just an understanding, acknowledgement that there are sovereign decisions out there that may or not necessarily align with ours. And we have to have that understanding when we're operating out there. But the idea that allies and partners are anything but receptive for us being out there I think is just, we're seeing every single day. I think a word was mentioned earlier about the Secretary of Defense's recent trip out there. Major inroads in the Philippines. You know, to think there's many of us in this room who remember how we left Subic Bay 3 decades ago. I was just there in November, and it is a completely different world. They are much more receptive to what we're doing out there. They're asking for us to do more out there, and there's many others. Another big benefit I think that allies and partners see out there with U.S. participation is that we bring investment to that. Now, what I'll tell you is this: it's not surprising that there's not a whole line of nations asking for a permanent military presence of American forces in their borders. That's understandable. We're the same way. It's an issue of sovereignty with a lot of these nations. But they absolutely want to have the rotational presence that American forces provide. And in the end, if we have a sustained, persistent presence in the region, I think that's as effective as having a permanent presence in one particular location. In many cases, it may actually be more effective in terms of the message that it sends of reassurance to allies and partners, and the message that it sends in terms of deterrence. But ultimately, it is about sustained, persistent presence in that theater and shared operations and actions with each other, engendering trust with each other, and then to set the conditions for, I think one of the panel members mentioned, for the conditions for opportunities and prosperity that the nations have.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Admiral Converse, switching gears a little bit, Washington has spent a lot of time over the past year and a half, talking about defense industrial capacity and increasingly focused on the capacity of shipyards, sometimes on submarines, sometimes on surface ships. But to the extent that we're seeing foreign investment in new U.S. shipyards, as we're seeing in the Philadelphia shipyard, and we're seeing more work done on U.S. ships abroad. We saw last month a U.S. ship come out of a Korean shipyard for an overhaul. As someone who is responsible for a very large portion of the U.S. Navy, what do you think a healthy industrial base looks like for the operating force? Can you talk to that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, I would say that our industrial base today in the United States builds the finest submarines, warships, aircraft, and weapons in the world, hands down. And so it's not about our ability to provide exquisite platforms and weapons. And we see that in action when we look at our dominance in the undersea, when we see the ability of our Arleigh Burke destroyers to own the Red Sea and to protect shipping across the Red Sea with just impressive results every single day against a large range of threats that they've been encountering. And we see that in our carrier strike groups as they're deploying across the globe. The question is, I think, in terms of capacity, what are the obstacles to regaining the dominance that we had in military shipbuilding that guided us to success in World War II, that allowed us in 1964 to commission 17 nuclear submarines that year across 3 classes. And then in 1981, when we were delivering the first Ohio-class SSBN to also commission in that year 6 Los Angeles-class submarines. How do we get to that kind of capacity? And I think that we could look at industry and we could say, well, you just need to get better, and we could certainly throw more money at it, and I'm sure that some people would like that. But I think what we really need to do is look at acquisition reform and understand what are the real obstacles. Because we know if we look at other industries that our free enterprise system can pivot incredibly fast and increase productivity when there's value in doing that. And we look towards our commercial space industry. We often say it's not rocket scientists, but I think in this case it is rocket science. If you look at our space launch capability, in 2017, I think we were number 3 or number 4 in the world in space launch in terms of tonnage into space or pounds. And in 2024, we launched more spacecraft by tonnage and by numbers than the rest of the world combined. That's what our industrial capacity in the United States of America, using largely organic capabilities in the United States, can do if unfettered by labyrinth Byzantine acquisition controls and certification of vendors and sub-vendors. It is so impossible to wind your way through that it makes it very excruciating for new vendors to come into the market and deliver capability. And I think there's opportunity there for us to look inward across the federal government and to find how can we perhaps not completely tear it down, because there's some value in setting standards and setting specifications for major warships and nuclear submarines, but find a system that can streamline that and can deliver to the warfighter weapon systems, sensors, and platforms without this cumbersome structure that has really dragged down industrial base and capacity up to this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Admiral Tiongson, I'd like to take that same theme, but pivot it just a little bit, because I know the Coast Guard is remarkably effective at taking its budget and stretching it pretty far. operationally, logistically, right? The Coast Guard sets a very high standard for efficiency. But over the past year and a half, I think the message from the Coast Guard is even the Coast Guard can't squeeze more efficiency out of the size budget it has. So what does a healthy Coast Guard fleet look like in the Indo-Pacific, right? For the missions you have, the space you're covering, what does that look like? And in your priority set, what rises to the top?
Yeah, great question. Great question. I want to go back to where I was talking in the previous question you asked, on the emphasis on border security and territorial integrity. I say that because probably not in this audience, but in other audiences, this question is pretty relative. And the question that I usually ask is, where is the west coast of the United States? And you get all kinds of answers when you ask that kind of question. Alaska maybe, or well, California, no. Hawaii. I'm gonna tell you that it's way beyond Hawaii. It's further west than that, right? So we have to start thinking about our territories, like Guam, like CNMI, like American Samoa, those places, and many more that are out there. And then I would say, what about those compact of free association states that are out there as well? When you add those to the list, so the Federated States of Micronesia, or Republic of Marshall Islands, Palau, all of a sudden you see how far the range is, which is essentially across the Pacific, right? The next land masses are places like Japan, those types of things. So when you talk about border security and territorial integrity, those are our EEZ. With the exception of those COFA states, those are our EEZs, our exclusive economic zones. That means we have sovereign rights to all of that land. And frankly, 80% of the US, I said land, I'm sorry, to all of those resources. 80% of our EEZ, our nation's EEZ, is in the Pacific. That gets you way across. Now, I haven't talked about the Arctic, and I haven't talked about, polar bears and penguins and all that stuff. I want to focus on getting across the West. That's a lot of water to cover in many ways. So you ask me, what does a healthy fleet look like? Let me tell you what an unhealthy fleet looks like. And that's kind of where I am today. So let's talk about rotary wing aircraft. Think 60 helicopters. We run those things until 19,000 hours. Be hard pressed to find anybody in here who runs those things to 19,000 hours. In fact, we take them from places like the Navy, refurbish them, and continue to run them until there. I have hulls, aircraft, the 60s, that are at 19,000 and approaching that. That's it. Then they're grounded. I have a fleet of C-27 maritime patrol aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft, that in my about 3 years in the job that I'm in right now, the availability of them has been dismal. In fact, those things were grounded, I would say, for about 1 year and 2 months during that time frame. I have cutters that we are operating, conducting that drug mission that I talked about a little bit earlier, that's over 50 years old. I have the one heavy icebreaker in the U.S. inventory that is over 50 years old. I'm working at a disadvantage when it comes to maritime domain awareness. I get a lot of help from my friends that are up here, but we don't have that organically. And certainly, when it comes to threats in those, remember I said control our ports and waterways. What about countering UAS? Those kinds of threats. I have very minimal capability to do that. So I have capability issues, and then I have people issues. Earlier today, we heard actually it was a question that was asked at a Commandant on the Marine Corps about meeting what they need for recruitment. Well, we're doing much better at recruitment than we have over the past year or two, but we still have a gap of about 25 to 3,000 people. When you're talking about a service that's about the size of the Coast Guard, that's a lot. So capacity and people is what we need. And here's the kicker. our annual budget, I think you're tracking this, is probably about $13.5 billion. Within that 13.5, there's less than $2 billion for acquisition, acquiring new assets. Wow, how long does it take to recapitalize at $2 billion at a time? So frankly, I'm sitting up here and I'm going to say, what we in the Coast Guard need is your support and advocacy moving forward. We need your support and advocacy for increasing the top line of our annual budget. We need your support and advocacy for inclusion and passage of other resource type of things that are being handled up in Capitol Hill. I'm talking about reconciliation as it moves forward. And we need your help in telling people about the Coast Guard story and what we do to help improve how we recruit folks as we move forward. So please, talk about us, tell folks what we need, and let's get after it. In there, I think I addressed your question about priorities. Unfortunately, I gave you a whole laundry list of priorities. But that's where I am today in trying to conduct operations within that vast of an area is very difficult. And as you mentioned, we are pros at stretching as best we can. But I heard today from the Commandant of the Marine Corps, perhaps it's time to do not more with less, but less with less. We don't want to be there. We want to go ahead and continue to provide a safe, secure, and prosperous America, and we need some help. So thank you for your support and advocacy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Farrar, we haven't talked too much about specific systems yet, but everyone in the room understands that there's a whole array of systems that are essential to conducting operations, whether law enforcement or warfighting. And many of those are increasingly at the cutting edge, right, to maintain our advantage against China. But if we think about this from a global perspective, with the rapid evolution of global threats, different risks in Indo-PACOM, then CENTCOM, then EUCOM, how does industry balance accelerating that new technology and ensuring reliability in the future?
That's a really important question, right? Particularly you look at the Indo-Pacific and the force structure that's there today, and you look at the timeline of the adversary. Clearly, the systems out there today need to be as capable and as possible, but doing it affordably. So I would say I'm going to key in on one thing, and I'll say we need to have set the right architecture and re-architecture for success on the existing systems. And what do I mean when I say that? I think one of the best ways to describe that is to use an example. And this one's near and dear to my heart. I was a young Aegis engineer 27 years ago when I started, and we've heard in the media and at prior sessions about Aegis over-the-air updates in the Red Sea, and that's just real briefly, it's effectively where our destroyers are out there, they see a threat picture, you're able to take that data, bring it back to the engineers, using AI and ML, update the system, push it back out to the ship, and it's ready to fight the next day. And we've done that dozens and dozens of times over the last year. So that's an example of using AI/ML. But what's important, and we don't talk about a lot, is if you rewind the clock 2 or 3 years prior, they made decisions to re-architect that system to have its component parts. Because previously, if you made updates to, let's say, a radar system, and you're talking about things within the fire control, you'd have to go recertify that whole system. They set the right architecture, and those aren't exciting decisions. Everyone loves to spend money on capability. When you set up that architecture, now we're reaping the benefits now. We're doing the same things undersea with AI and ML, and I really can't get into the details. When you look at counter C5ISR&T, trying to do that across Title 10 and Title 50 boundaries is another challenge. And the other really important part of setting the right architecture is when you do that, you're effectively getting after decoupling hardware and software. We know that software is the future fight, and when you do that, you can then deliver software development kits and APIs to partners and non-traditionals in other countries where they can start bringing their best capability in, and that's the most rapid way to do that, whether it's on an upgrade to an existing system, or taking, you talked about that, cutting edge capability, take that cutting edge capability, when you're architected right, we should be able to take that with no problem. And again, getting after the existing force structure is critically important, because we have to keep as many of the players on the field, make them survivable and more lethal, and we're going to do that with bringing that cutting edge technology in.
Great, thank you. I had hoped to have about 10 or 15 minutes for a crosstalk of the questions I've been accumulating, but we've got some excellent audience questions, so I'm going to dive to those right now. I will target or open the floor as appropriate based on the question, but the first one is a pretty general question that I think each of you could speak to in a different way. Each of you has spoken about combat readiness in both strategic and operational environments. What do you think officers should do to prepare for a future type of warfare that we have not seen or operated in before? So I'll just open that to anyone who's interested in commenting.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. And the question, what do we do as officers to prepare for a combat environment that we've never seen before? I think a lot of the things that we're doing are preparing us precisely for that. And we talked a little bit about checking the environment, understanding what the environment looks like, and then setting up a structure, a command and control structure within our headquarters, within our facilities, that's going to enable us to fight within this new environment, this highly contested environment, this environment that requires us to operate at a pace and a tempo and at a level of command and control that's perhaps much higher and much more challenging to integrate than we've ever done before across space, across cyber, across air, sea, and subsea, and to take inputs from a range of combatant commanders who control capabilities across those and integrate them. And so, we're working on those structures. We're working on setting up a JTF and Joint Fires and Effects Centers that combine all of the elements of space fires, electronic warfare fires, kinetic, non-kinetic, and information operations, and can integrate those at a timing and tempo that's relevant to the fight. The next element, and I sat through one of the other panels today that was talking about the MOC as a warfighting platform, and the MOC is a Maritime Operations Center. And it's talking about setting up these federated operations centers across each echelon that allows us to fight that way at the operational all the way down to the tactical level across our fleet commands and across our individual JTFs, like JTFs focused on space and cyber, and certainly at our numbered fleet commands and down to our carrier strike groups, our amphibious readiness groups, and our theater undersea warfare centers. And then with these federated command and control structures and an understanding of how we're going to do this integration across the services and with our partners and allies, then we need to start working on the training and certification of our operators, from officers to enlisted, to do that work. And we've recently, within the last year in the summer, the Commandant of the Marine Corps and our Chief of Naval Operations directed PAC Fleet to stand up as the Maritime Fires Executive Agent. And our tasking is to integrate maritime fires with joint fires across the globe, but certainly within these Joint Fires and Effects Centers that are a part of our Maritime Operations Center. And we've been aggressively doing that. And we've recently had our first Joint Fires Summit, which had overwhelming participation by all the stakeholders.
Yeah, anyone who knows me probably knows exactly where I'm going to go with this one. And it's, you want a new idea, read an old book. And it's about studying your profession. And I'm going to, I have my own paraphrasing of Mark Twain. History doesn't repeat. It just comes back better armed. And what's happening is we're seeing allies or adversaries out there that have learned some lessons. They've watched us and they've learned. So there's a couple of things. One, like I said, imagine in your head what the next fight's going to be like. There's probably been something that similar has happened in history to read through and to live vicariously through those folks and maybe hopefully not repeat any of the errors that they made. Don't necessarily fight the last fight. I don't necessarily believe that the next fight's going to look like the Desert Wars, for example. But there were some lessons that clearly were valuable coming out of those fights that are applicable. But just as emphatically, I'd say that there are other areas where we need to shift our thinking and think differently about how we're going to operate. I said earlier in my opening comments that we've never had to operate in contested strategic and operational space. None of us in uniform who have had to. I think the next fight, that's going to be something we absolutely have to be ready for that. That means we're going to have to be ready for things like loss of key platforms in the operational environment that we haven't had to worry about before. We're going to have to figure out how the defense industrial base is going to keep up with regenerating not just the platform that was lost, but the stuff that was on that platform. So maybe we need to think a little bit differently about how we conduct movement, distribution, shifting of forces, shifting of assets in ways that we haven't had to worry about before. The idea that I think the adversary is going to allow us to pull up to a port, take our sweet time offloading vessels and aircraft, I think that's something in the past. There will be some instances where we may be able to do that, but not in a truly contested environment, which is something, again, I think we have to be prepared for. And then the last piece is we got to exercise, we got to rehearse what we're believing this next fight's going to be like. Do it with the joint force. Do those rehearsals with our allies, and do so where the tendency to fairy dust the hard stuff. How did the force get in place to begin with? Mm-hmm. Don't fairy dust it, because we're not going to have that opportunity to do. You could do that in earlier fights because that movement was generally uncontested. It's not going to be the case in this next one. We need to be prepared for how we're going to conduct that. And we need to think about how we're actually going to regenerate at scale the requirements that we have in order to conduct or sustain our fighting.
Thanks. Admiral.
I can't disagree with anything that was said here, and I really value all that was said here by the other panelists. I want to move further left on that spectrum in competition crisis and be in that competition side. It'll sound like a bunch of words, but I'm telling you, it does work. If your goal is to be a trusted partner out there, you have to do a couple of different things, right? You have to be able to meet the partners where they're at with what they need, always seeing the threats and challenges through their eyes. You have to understand where that has come from. I think that's to Lieutenant General Skilanka's point about history. Make sure you understand those things. Make sure you know about as much as you can about those individuals of which you're trying to be a partner or a friend with, and go ahead and make yourself to a point where you can be habitually aligned with where they are. That just makes that transformation a little bit easier as you go through those things. I would say you have to go ahead and do those types of things, particularly because of the import of what you heard up here already, the importance of allies and partners in this fight. And we need to do that earlier and continue to do that so that when crisis does happen, we know who we can rely on, we know who's there, and the fight can be together versus just us. Thanks.
That's great.
So I think the word, how do we prepare our officers, was very key in that question. And from an industry perspective, I'll just kind of simplify it into, in the future fight, we look at, we need to have affordable mass, we need joint long-range kill chains, and we need to deliver decision superiority. So affordable mass, that is effectively, from a strategy perspective, we're saying we're going to try to out-manufacture a manufacturing superpower. We have to get after and actually go do it. But that's not, that's kind of the robot army. Joint long-range kill chains is operating in a contested environment, bringing in space, making sure we have interoperability. But the last one is where I think Admiral Converse started out, which is the command and control and decision superiority. Where we have our biggest advantages, they have a very structured command and control environment. And if we can disrupt that and we can give our officers the tools to get after it in a way that they cannot, that is the piece that we don't talk about enough, is delivering that decision superiority by presenting the AI, ML, and letting them make the decisions out in the battlefield that we know that's probably the biggest strength we have right now, and we can't let that atrophy, and that's something that industry looks at and tries to deliver.
That's great. Thank you. We've got about 5 minutes left. So let me suggest if each of you has like 30 seconds to a minute of kind of one big takeaway you'd like the audience to walk out of the room with, and then we'll wrap up. And since I just sprung this question on all of you, anyone who wants to take it first?
Go ahead, Andy.
I'll jump in there. I mean, again, a lot of folks have talked about allies and partners. I certainly have as well. I can't stress the importance of that. What's happening there in what I would call the Western Pacific, if you will, or the West Philippine Sea. Notice how I did that. I would say that there are a lot of Coast Guards that are there. And because of the way that we have approached these folks, we are working side by side together with folks like the Japan Coast Guard, the Philippine Coast Guard, the Korea Coast Guard, India Coast Guard, Australia, New Zealand, all of those things that have a Navy, but more or less like our U.S. Coast Guard. And that fits us in there very nicely. And because of that, that's a force multiplier to help with our nation's national security and America's prosperity. So thank you.
Thank you, Admiral.
I think, number one, I agree with Andy. There's a near-term solution to a lot of the challenges we face, certainly with our shipbuilding industry and perhaps with our weapons production capacity, and that is to partner with allies that have larger shipbuilding capacity and have the capacity to work with us to build high-end weapon systems en masse, even as we work internally to rebuild our commercial and military shipbuilding capacity, as we do the long and hard work of developing a workforce internally in the United States of America, from high schools to colleges to the industrial base, and looking at the pay scales and looking at the technical skills that they need. And as we look at acquisition reform and understanding that we in the Navy and the federal government are a big part of the problem with our defense industrial base, we have created this, and we can tear that down and fix it if we make a concerted effort to streamline our processes. If we, as military officers, assume the risk that's inherent in that restructuring to be able to achieve the efficiency we need for major combat operations at the scale that we expect to see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna close out with also an ally and partner piece, and it's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself from my earlier statement where I said that you can't write a plan whose success hinges on the participation of a partner or an ally. And that's, again, that was not to speak pejoratively against about any of our allies or partners. It's, like I said, an understanding and acknowledgement of their national sovereignty and of their democratic decision cycles. Mm-hmm. The presumption of the United States that anybody will follow us in a conflict, I think, is ignorant at best and dangerous at worst. And I say that knowing full well also that we're not going to ever fight, hopefully, alone. We're going to rely on partners, and we're going to rely on allies out there. So how do I square that circle? Because there's this term that I really like out there called strategic empathy, and it's understanding not just what your adversaries are doing, but also what your allies and partners are doing. And it's taking their collective strengths. Not everybody necessarily has to participate militarily. There are other areas where an ally or a partner can be a true difference maker in the other elements of national influence that are out there, be it in the diplomatic, information, or the economic realm. And there are significant places where they can assist us in that area. So the point in all this is that cultivating that matters. But you have to do that from a true partner standpoint. Every nation out there knows that we are the most powerful nation out there. There's no reason why we need to look at someone and regard them as a junior partner. That's kind of understood in many ways, and folks, there's no reason that folks need to push that on anyone. There's, in many ways, though, what is viewed as maybe a lack of capacity in one area just makes us, I think, it's more incumbent upon us to look for and find where those respective strengths are in that ally or partner that you've got out there that can, again, buttress and reinforce the overarching objective that we're trying, the end state that we're going after. And that, to me, is really being a true partner and understanding that every one of your coalition partners has a vital role and can help. The last piece I'll say in that is you got to rehearse with them. You got to bring them in, and you got to rehearse with them, and you got to do things that enable you to share information. And don't reflexively go to some overclassified characterization. Because in the end, it's about sharing that information with folks to enable a stronger and more effective force.
Thank you. Joe?
And just 30 seconds and following up on that, I think the one takeaway would be no one industry can do this by themselves. We need to exhibit that partnering behavior, whether it's, partnering with the non-traditionals or, other defense primes, but also the sovereign industry throughout our allies and partners to really help unpack what you were talking about in terms of getting the allies and partners in this. So it's really no one company can do it all, and exhibit that partnering behavior is what it's going to take for industry to get after it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just to sum up, I was trying to create a list of all of the issues we've touched on, and I stopped writing at about 14. So I think if we could have another 2 hours with each of you, we might be able to unpack most of what you all raised. This has been an outstanding hour, at least for me, and I hope for the audience. And I would ask everyone to join me in offering a round of applause for our panelists.